And I feel like athletes are like sports cars. Like many of the advancement in sports cars have led or come into what commercial cars with, like ABS, all these cool features that we get from sports cars, companies doing research and pushing their research in that way. And I feel like athletes are pretty much the same thing. So all the research that's been done to give them that 1-2% advantage, which is huge at the top level, right?
Yep.
Trickles down to us ordinary people, and we learn, we can do all this stuff to optimize our own training and our own health.
Definitely. I mean, that's what brought me towards the more clinical research. Exactly as you said, how it trickles down. And now you start to have people actually suggesting that you could use hypoxia as a way to treat obesity.
Really? So hypoxia, the lack of oxygen.
The lack of oxygen, yeah, high altitude. So literally, if you're obese, some are arguing that you may want to move probably out of Australia because we don't have high altitude here.
Yeah.
But somewhere, you actually don't need to be too high, but even cities like Denver, which is 1,600 meters of altitude, or even a bit higher, could be potentially beneficial because of the alterations to your metabolism when you live at high altitude.
Right.
It is very theoretical at the minute, but the reason why I'm saying that is because I've actually reviewed a grant from a colleague for people in New Zealand who proposed to do exactly that.
That study, wow. This brings this is one of my favorite comedians, Joe Rogan. He moved to Colorado, and he was saying that just walking like at that altitude felt like he was jogging it was so much more taxing on his body. So is that one of the reasons why you use more energy? Or is it that you use more energy, or you just get fatigued because your body is preventing you from using all the energy you have?
It really depends what type of activity you have. Again, the day-to-day life is mainly aerobic, so you require the oxygen. So if you drop the level of oxygen, it's definitely going to affect your day-to-day life. But I think it's probably more on the biochemical side where the whole metabolism will be affected. But I'm thinking of which some actually colleagues from Canberra, from the Australian Institute of Sport, probably 20 years ago now, published a paper that an altitude as low as 500 meters is enough to affect performance in high-end athletes.
Wow.
So, when we think about high altitude, we're thinking about high mountains, but you don't necessarily need to go very high to start to feel the effects. So your friend, this actor who was talking about, again, Colorado, I suppose Denver, which is usually where you land, is only 1,600 meters.
Yeah.
It's not very tall by any stretch of imagination, but yet it can be sufficient to make people who are quite responsive feel the effects.
Yeah. And apparently if you're pregnant, it's not good to be in high altitude. There's higher chances of miscarriage.
There's been some studies, These will be mainly on natives. So again, South America, Bolivia is a typical example, and or Peru, where the miscarriages are more present, and I think the babies are born smaller usually. They tend to catch up a little bit later on, but
right.
High altitude natives are an absolutely fascinating population.
Why?
Because you have very different responses. So when you think about it, we obviously don't do well at high altitude because we're not used to it. We'll go on holidays and come back down and that's it. While the people who are born and bred, you would think that they're used to it and they've been there for generations. But actually what the research is showing is that you have a difference between South America and the Himalayas.
The what, sorry?
The Himalayas. So
the Himalayas,
where Everest is. And the reason is the Andes are younger mountains than the Himalayas. So people have been exposed to high altitude for longer in Tibet than they have been in South America. So we do poorly. The Tibetans do very well, and people in the Andes are somewhere in between. And some of them are doing extremely well. Some others are doing extremely poorly. So it's an absolutely fascinating model from an evolutionary point of view because of that. And those who are not doing too well, they develop what's called chronic mountain sickness, which is actually a condition in which they overexpress EPO, so they produce too many red blood cells and they just can't switch it off, which means that they end up with very thick blood. And it's very much like yogurt. You're talking about a blood which is twice as thick as what we have. And obviously they're throwing thrombosis and etc. And they really don't do well.
Wow, and that's dangerous because you could get like stroke.
Yep.
Yeah, I've heard of stories where in the Tour de France, like bikers literally in the middle of the night have to go on rides because they've taken such amounts of EPO that their blood is so thick that if they don't do that, supposedly they might have a stroke.
Yes, it was mainly, I would say, in the 90s. Now they've improved the techniques.
Yeah.
And they use a lot more transfusion. So you don't, because the problem with that is when your blood is too thick, the heart has to do a lot of work to make it pump. Again, it's the same as if you want to pump yogurt versus water. That's very much the analogy you can take. So literally, as you were saying, yeah, they had the alarm with the heart rate monitor, where if the heart rate drops too much, the alarm goes off. They jump on the bike, get the heart going, and then go back to bed.
Oh, God.
So now what they do instead is they do blood transfusion. So your blood is not thicker, but instead of having 5 liters, you will have 6 or 7 liters in the system. So they get around that, and it's your own blood, so it's harder to detect.
Yeah, but they can detect. I heard they detect the plastics in the IVs that I know they ban that in the UFC.
Yeah.
I was gonna say something. I was gonna say, yeah, your point about how athletes push things to the extreme. That's one of them.
That's one of them, definitely.
That's so crazy.
How much is too much? Yeah, that's...
Wow.
Here is a clue. That is too much.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Some people are crazy because they just want to be great. You know, what's funny is that I listened to Lance Armstrong. He was on the Joe Rogan Experience. It's a 3-hour podcast, and they were talking. And he's like, everyone's doing it. Everyone's like, he goes, you don't understand the mindset of an athlete. Like, they're willing to do anything and everything.
For a minute of glory.
Yeah, yep. to make it to the top.
Yep. It is a difficult one. And when you think about it, again, you know, I might be a pessimist, but when everything blew up, I think that was in the Tour de France 1997 with the Festina affair, where they said half of the peloton is on EPO. They were racing at a certain speed. We are 20 years down the track. They're racing faster. And we're supposed to believe that everybody is drinking clear water now.
Yeah.
So, are they getting better at it? Don't get me wrong, training has improved. There is probably more selection and etc.
Yeah.
But I think thinking that most of them are clear is probably a bit
naive. Yeah, for sure. And when Lance Armstrong, when they stripped him of his titles, apparently the next natural person out of all the people that competed was like number 19 or number 20.
They pretty much all went down at some stage in their career, yeah.
Yeah.
Either they admitted afterwards when it was too late to, when it was prescription for them to lose the titles, or they got caught at some stage. But yeah, the top ranked are, we can ask questions about them.
Yeah.
I'd say some of them, I'm still keen to believe that because it's a one event a year, you plan everything around these 3 weeks for the Tour de France, for example. So I can believe that some of them could not take much, if anything, but those who are repeating the effort many times, you get to wonder. Really. Yeah. Again, I might be completely wrong, but
yeah. Well, in the UFC, what they're doing, and this is something I think you mentioned earlier, to look at trends. Mm-hmm. They collect your urine for like years, and then they might not be able to detect compounds that you might be taking now because they just haven't built the kits, the assays for it. But let's say 10 years down the track, they might have a kit or an assay for that specific compound. Then they can come back and test your urine from now, which is like 10 years have passed. And then if they find that you've tested positive, they strip you of it.
Yeah, definitely. They've done that as well in the Olympics. Some of the Russian athletes have lost their titles from 2012, and that was in the last year or so. So again, in retrospect, exactly the same way as you said, the technology has improved for detecting different compounds, and they went back and said, "Oh,
yeah, you did it.
You did it.
we caught you.
Got you."
Yeah. Thanks for listening to Blab Coats. Rate and review our podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, because it does help us spread the word. And if you like what we're doing here, then help us grow it by sharing this with a friend of a friend, or your mailman, even your mailman's mailman. We also want to hear from you, so send us questions or comments to blabcoats@gmail.com. And if you have any interesting questions or comments, then we'll talk about it on air.